our philosophy with building PubKey was, all right, we're not going to say never on a server. We're going to say use a server if you want, don't use a server if you don't want. Either way is fine, because no matter what happens to you, you can redefine it later. So it's just basically adding this censorship resistance, this credible exit to using servers. And that's a big part of what PubKey enables that other alternatives don't really enable in quite the same way or at all.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to Bitcoin Audible. I am Guy Swan, the guy who has read more about Bitcoin than anybody else you know. We've got a fantastic show. It's been a bit since we've had John Carvalho on the show, but I have been wanting to take a deep dive or take a deeper dive into PubKey, which we just did an introduction to this, read the PubKey, the next web piece on the show very recently, which I wanted to do as a precursor to this conversation, because anybody who's been following me and this show knows that I've been rabbit holing really hard down the peer-to-peer Nostr, basically the rebirth of the decentralized internet. And this is deeply tied into this, and this is a very, very exciting and very interesting new project in that space, looking at what the optimum of each of the design choices is, and how to take advantage of the web of trust, how to take advantage of a key system. And I think this is just going to be a really, really great conversation. In fact, it was a really great conversation because we have already had this conversation, and I think you guys are really, really going to like it. So real quick, this episode is brought to you by Fold. You can get sats back on literally everything that you do. I pay my bills and I get sats back. Somebody just posted on Twitter, actually, that they paid their taxes, got like $25 or something back, and it is in sats, so it goes up with the price of Bitcoin. This is just one of those things that just kind of eases the pain a little bit, you know what I mean? And then you can put those sats in your BitKit wallet, which is a non-custodial, on-chain, and Lightning wallet, which has one of the best user interfaces. I love their design. I love the simplicity of just, this is your savings and this is your spending account. They run an LSP so that all of the back end is just obfuscated away. You don't have to think about it. BitKit is a fantastic wallet if you haven't tried it out. You'll actually hear a little bit about it in this show because John Carvalho and Synonym is actually running the BitKit wallet as well. And then lastly, for your cold storage, you want a solid hardware wallet, and mine is not in, it's in the mail, but it hasn't come yet. I just bought a Jade Plus. And Blockstream has an affiliate link, so I have that affiliate link down in the show notes. I think it gives you a discount. I don't remember what it is right now, but I will have it down there so that you can check it out and you can get your J Plus. It's a really awesome looking hardware wallet, and keep an eye out. I'm probably going to do some videos and post it on Nostr and Twitter and all that good stuff. So check them out. All right, with that, let's go ahead and jump into today's awesome conversation with John Carvalho, Bitcoin error log on the next web, built with PubKey. All right. Welcome to the show, dude. It's been a minute. We've only done 2 shows together on here. Maybe, I don't know. We've
I don't remember how many, because it's been so many years now.
It's been a long time. I wanted to have this conversation mostly about, well, partially actually just have an update on what you've been doing with Synonym, because I think the first time or the last time we did this, it was really like when y'all were really kicking off. And I think BitKit was either brand new or just proposed or something. Like you were talking about that. So it's been a minute. We have a lot to catch up on. But first off, just I feel like everybody knows Bitcoin error log. But just in case, give a short introduction for yourself to the audience.
Sure.
And I'll direct them to all the other episodes we've done together.
A brief background on myself and Synonym. So yeah, I've been in Bitcoin since late 2012, almost full time since then in various ways, but in the kind of Bitcoin business scene more maybe in the last, I don't know, actually it's been like 7 years or so, because I did Exotica before this and BitRefill after Exotica. And so, yeah, I've been doing Bitcoin stuff for a while, mostly making products, very involved in Bitcoin discourse on Twitter, for whatever that's worth to people. And I'm somewhat known for having, I guess, unpopular opinions when it comes to Bitcoin things, but my own personal goal is just
contrarian Carvalho.
Clarity. Well, I mean, I almost take that as an insult, to be honest. Like, it's accurate. Like, I'm not going to deny that I am quite contrarian, but the way people use that, they often mean like for no reason, and I think that I have.
Yeah, I would disagree with that. I would disagree with that use of it. I think about it as John Carvalho has his own opinion. And like whatever anybody else's opinion is, John Carvalho will still have his opinion. So like that's what I think about.
I make an effort to like take something clean and be like, all right, what do I think about this? Forget about what everybody says. These are just data points. They're not going to let anybody influence me. So sorry, influencers.
Oftentimes that is contrarian, but not always.
So I sometimes end up in interesting meme situations because of my behavior, like the Roger Ver thing with the flipping me off. But and then on Synonym, our history is a little bit tricky because we've actually been around. It'll be, I think it's been 4 years now. And so the first 2 years, actually it's coming on 5 years. In a few months it'll be 5 years. But the first 2 years or so we were like in stealth mode. And so we didn't really do anything in public. And then that's when we kind of revealed what we were doing and what we were, and the early stages of BitKit, which is a Bitcoin wallet that supports Bitcoin and self-custodial Lightning with a node in the wallet. What actually happened in 2024 was we finally came out of beta with BitKit. So we formally released that into app stores. So it's like stable and working for the most part as far as you can go with Lightning and LDK. We also released a few months ago in October at Plan B in Lugano the next iteration of all of our web solution stuff, which is called PubKey.
Sweet. That's really what I want to get into here. Because I barely got to even get a good explanation of what it was in Lugano. But basically I actually got the best part of it just chatting with you in the food hall for a couple of minutes there. This is very, very close to a lot of the things that I've been working on and a lot of where I feel like the tech and things are moving now. Just because I think if you look like one layer up above kind of the money and the foundations of this, we're just realizing how many additional problems there are that we're seeing the manifestation of the consequences of centralized everything online. And maybe it's just like my proximity to it. I feel like there has been a far larger push and more concerted and better funded effort towards solving this than there has been since I've been following it. And Synonym is very close to all of that. Like that's what you guys are doing in a lot of ways. And so maybe give me the overview of what your thinking on Synonym is. And then we did just read the introduction to, or the next web piece on PubKey. I'm not sure if you saw that on the show recently. So probably a lot of the audience already has an introduction, but if you could give me kind of a second rundown from your perspective, because you usually will explain it differently after a week passes. What's the view of PubKey, and why did Synonym build PubKey specifically?
Sure. I guess maybe I'll zoom out all the way first, which is just, you mentioned Synonym. And so Synonym at large, our mission is basically to build what we call the atomic economy. It's just a term. It's like a project name or a concept name. It's not the name of a product or anything like that. It's not a grand philosophy on anything. It's just the idea that, Bitcoin gave us the idea that we could take down big banks with, a market created money that wasn't controlled by any one person. And now that got us all thinking, well, maybe we should do that for all of our big problems. And so that's what, and I remember, not so much lately, but years ago, people would always talk about a future of hyper Bitcoinization and everything being Bitcoin. And I always felt like we were a bit irresponsible as a group, as a culture, and as a people of Bitcoiners, um, justifying that kind of prediction. Like we never said, here is how it will work when we destroy big banks and the government's gone. And, like this is what we'll replace it. We kind of just like, it just has to be this way because it makes sense and we like it. But what Synonym's trying to do is say, we actually have an intentional plan and a model for creating what could be an alternative digital society. And so the idea here is basically to say, what can we do to replace, by using technology, big tech, big banks, and big state? And so we're basically trying to figure out ways to use Bitcoin and, market generated credit systems and things like this for the money and finance part. Use things like PubKey and decentralized web technologies and decentralized social media technologies for the kind of big tech part. And we also cover a lot of other aspects of big tech in the PubKey plan, like how to kind of replace Google as an entity and all publishing platforms, things like this. And then with big state, by basically incorporating within PubKey abilities for people to self-regulate, whether it be through reputation, forming webs of trust across a social graph, things like this. So what Synonym is trying to do is deliver this kind of first version of an atomic economy where the whole loop is complete, where you can say, take your BitKit wallet, find people using our, web of trust systems and things like this where they're in total control, and match with other content, people, merchants, whatever it may be, to make purchases and sell things as well digitally. So it's kind of a way to just cover everything that you would need to in the digital realm of having a way to kind of exit the current system and into an independent system. And so PubKey, of course, is a major part of that. So getting more specific to PubKey, the simplest place to start is probably just to say that the basis of PubKey is using a public key as a domain name. Now, it means more than that, but that is actually like the most literal, simple definition of the most core part of PubKey. It's just simply taking the concept that people are today with Bitcoin public keys, where you can pay to them and you can have a private counter key for that to be able to sign with and prove you own it. Taking those concepts, and now we are bringing them to the web, similar to how Nostr is doing. But the difference is that Nostr doesn't have any sort of what we call discovery. The discovery problem. It's a problem in peer-to-peer web and things like this. There's no way to basically know how to find me when I change location or when I get censored or things like this. And so what we did is we take the same concepts that people use for websites and we applied them to keys. So now what you do is instead of buying a authoritative domain name from an ICANN registrar, you know what I mean, like going to GoDaddy or something. Well, if you've ever done that, you've noticed that when you buy a website, you actually only get the name. And now you have to point that name at a server, where your files are, where your web pages are, where whatever it is you're trying to point at is. Well, that's called DNS, and every web provider has to do this. Every domain provider, has to allow you to customize your DNS. But that's where the censorship can also happen. So when a domain gets taken down, they basically rewrite the DNS, and now you don't get to have control of where it points anymore. But with PubKey, you sign a DNS record with your key, and then you place all those DNS settings into mainline DHT. And what mainline DHT is it's maybe some of your listeners are familiar because there's a lot of similarities to Hyperswarm DHT. The difference being that mainline DHT is much, much bigger and much, much older. So it's proven a lot. It's survived the RIA trying to take them down, and total government wanted to be against it, and it's still used today, mostly for downloading large files illegally. But it's a great way to distribute data in a peer-to-peer way that is very difficult to censor, right? Because these movie companies never figured out how to stop them. And the mainline DHT network is millions of nodes. So as far as like comparing it like to other decentralized options, nothing even holds a candle. Not even Bitcoin holds a candle to the decentralization of it. And so we've published some, research that we've done as well, so people can verify this and see exactly how many nodes not only are in mainline DHT, but support the specific specs that we use to be able to put your domain name in there. So something roughly at minimum 2 million nodes are supporting our method, where you could put your DNS record into the system and have it return custom DNS endpoints. Maybe this isn't the simplest explanation for some people, but going back to where I started, just again, you know what a public key is? Now you can make it so people can find any data or any payment information that you want to be able to be found based on that key in a way that nobody can stop it. And so what we're doing is we're taking that foundation when we're building the rest of the web tools that you would need to be compatible with that. So now you need a server, you need an indexer, kind of like Google. You need the web again, but compatible with this method. And so we've built and are building these tools, including a full-fledged application, the PubKey app, which will be like an interface for while you do any type of file publishing, eventually any type of digital, e-commerce kind of stuff, etc.
Will that be entirely web-based, I guess?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So it's basically a browser in a sense.
It's a website that's a browser, if you want to be.
It's a website that's a browser.
That's technical. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes.
Well, so is I don't want to make it sound. It is different, but it's not like night and day when you think about like a Nostr client. They're also kind of like a web browser, right? Like they're pulling data from different relays and they're assembling that data in the client, or I don't know, it depends on the provider and how they assemble the data and how they structure it. But generally speaking, in order to do decentralized web stuff, you want to take the data from whatever sources and let the user control what they render in their client. And so in that sense, yes, the only thing, what makes it like a browser is that our website will also allow you to support this method where you're the discovery method, but also like we're not coming at this specifically only for social media. We're trying to say, we want to kill Google, we want to kill Medium, we want to kill X, we want to kill all the things that could censor you by being too centralized. And your audience probably is familiar a bit with hole punch and hypercore stuff. And so what I mentioned there is, while we tried to use that model at first, but what we realized is, yes, peer-to-peer is the ideal, like totally peer-to-peer. But what you need to realize is that there's always going to be an extreme advantage and use case for gathering many people in one place online. Like, for example, you can't have a highly efficient exchange and Bitcoin order book without a centralized setup. You can't do this entirely peer-to-peer. It just doesn't work because you need very low latency. Same thing with like an extremely large amount of data, like something like X. If you're going to serve millions and millions of people a social media platform, you need scale. You need actual centralized scale. And so to get the kind of performance people expect without having to wait for each tweet to load from all these different sources and things like this, you need centralization. So our philosophy with building PubKey was, all right, we're not going to say never on a server. We're going to say use a server if you want. Don't use a server if you don't want. Either way is fine, because no matter what happens to you, you can redefine it later. So if you want to use, say, Synonym server to host all your data and store all your photos and store all your, microblogging posts or tweets or notes or whatever, then if I decide, I don't like you and you're not going to be on my server, that doesn't affect you, because not only can you update your DNS records, but you can do so in a way that there's no loss of continuity. Like your users will just start pulling the data from somewhere else, either from you directly or a new provider. So it's just basically adding this censorship resistance, this credible exit to using servers. And that's a big part of what PubKey enables that other alternatives don't really enable in quite the same way or at all.
Yeah. Now I'm curious about because the philosophy you were just kind of, or the framing you were just laying out of like, you can't have it entirely peer-to-peer, and obviously there are problems with servers, but you want servers. Like there's nothing inherently wrong with servers. It's the fact that we end up getting trapped.
It's all servers, right? Like
it's all servers. It's all servers.
Yeah.
It's a question of you want unreliable
It's just
mobile
whether you want
servers that are
multi-user,
going on and
yeah.
off. Exactly. And so like my thinking has always been like, you don't shun servers or shun centralization. What you want is to lower the barrier of entry as low as possible, so that you basically don't have you have an infinite optionality when it comes to quote unquote servers, or how you deliver, or what device you lean it on. And if you do have a computer that is reliable, you can easily run it yourself, or you can participate. I mean, that was like one of the crazy things about like in BitTorrent history, is that you'll get some random person who's just like a seeder by, like they're like a hoarder or something, and they'll see thousands of movies and have terabytes of data back when terabytes were insane. And they'd be huge parts of the network. Like the network would still centralize, and not centralize, but it would still have hotspots. You know, you still have the Pareto distribution. Like it doesn't go away just because, you know, the idea of everybody holding the exact same amount of blob and all their own data, like that ideal just doesn't exist, right?
Well, it's a spectrum, right? Like, in other words, like on a mimetic level or some philosophical level, you could say the more copies there are of certain data, the more popular it is and the more relevant it is, right? And so, and then the less copies of it is, the less people need it. And so data will just like replicate, you know, as much as it needs to for people to have access to it. You know, and the problem with, say, purely peer-to-peer is that you need the data to be very popular for tons of people to want to even bother being involved, right? And so you're not going to, in other words, John's personal Twitter feed is not something that a bunch of peer-to-peer people are going to be interested in seeding for me for free. Maybe the people that follow me, maybe the people that hire me, you know, something like this. But generally speaking, that's why you only see really popular movies that are easy to find in BitTorrents, because it's this nobody's going to bother seeding and all this stuff. It's just not popular data.
Yeah. So the reason I point that out specifically is because we have always been basically open to discovery or what's going to work better for ParaDrive. Like I want the project to work, and I don't really care how it works, like what option. And I was curious about the DNS thing because I didn't get a concrete answer yet in the stuff I've dug through. Was the DNS entry, is it kind of arbitrary? Is it a little bit like slash tags was before things started shifting away from that?
It's literally DNS spec. It's literally DNS.
It's literally DNS spec.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now that doesn't. Now I want to note that using something as literally DNS is just as abstract as you're worried about, though. In other words, what I mean is, yes, DNS has a spec. There's CNAME, A, quadruple A, you know, TXT. But people use, for example, that TXT command, and they'll put anything in there, and they'll make their own protocols around what to do with the data in that arbitrary data. So you can encode data in there, et cetera. So you have tons of flexibility to abstract things, to use it in ways you could be more creative than just websites. Like, for example, we have a project that we've been working on for a while, but we tabled it last year. We're going to pick it up again this year, called PayKit. And this used to be called /pay, you might remember. But we got rid of all the slash branding, and it's called PayKit. And it's just basically an abstracted payment protocol for doing settlements across different payment methods. Well, we're going to update it to use PubKey. So basically, when you go up and look up,
that's literally what I was about to ask.
You go and look up the DNS records. What you'll find is payment endpoints. You could say, "Oh, here's how all the places I can pay John," and that is just as simple as you putting some custom information in there, pointing to a specific file on a server and saying, that's my payment endpoint file. Go look in there. And you could even do this for individuals. You can say, like, this is my payment endpoint file for Guy and no one else. And he'll find payment info that I want him to find there. So it's just a way of, you know, really having discovery. It's like lightning address and UMA and all these things just on steroids. It's like saying, here's like the holistic way to approach payment protocol and payment settlement problems. And that's all because we have this ability to just define the endpoints dynamically and change them anytime we want.
That's cool. So my thinking was, a text record with my lightning address or key send or
Right.
even a hyperswarm key, for a public drive that I've got over there, as so that you could basically use the PubKey as an abstraction layer on top of these others to kind of marry them together, so that if you were using PubKey, you could then see kind of all of them. And PubKey would specifically be the one that is DNS compatible, so it would be viewable in a browser very easily. And that's really the big thing that kind of got me when I was looking into, or we were talking about it the first time, was the fact that you'd be able to do it entirely in the browser because of how you guys have gone about making this. It is literally a new DNS, literally, and just a new way to deliver it and store it. And funny enough, you didn't need a blockchain. I can't believe you didn't need a name coin.
I don't even bother
one.
saying that anymore, but you're reminding me, in the first years of Synonym, I would say, and one of our goals is to show, shitcoiners, they always say you need Web3, blah, 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 that you can do all of these things, solve all of these problems without a blockchain. And I think that, I think we saw recently that funding got pulled for Web5, and they were trying to use Ion, and that was doing identity in a blockchain. And as far as I know, that's gone nowhere in the past 5 years or so. So I think what we've done is a much more practical thing, albeit now convincing actual web browsers and operating systems to support this method would be even better. But we can work around that because mostly people are going to be using clients. So we can install what's called PKDNS or PKARR. PKAR is the actual method that we call it, the name of the method, public key addressable resource records. This is our DNS thing. But yeah, we can make that work directly in client applications. So we don't necessarily need browsers themselves to support it, although it would be nice. And we have some people hacking with PubKey already, and they've shown, running PKDNS locally and just putting a key in their web browser and showing a web page resolve, which is cool. Just think, okay, people, the way that we've designed it, the links have integrity. The links only break if no one has the data anymore. You know what I mean? So as long as you keep defining where your data, where you can find the files that you're looking for, then you can always be in control of those endpoints. So if you have, say, guys key / guys, favorite photo, and then somebody puts that URL in, but I censored you and that photo is deleted now, then all you have to do is update your new server and they'll find that photo at the same URL.
Yeah. That's awesome. God, that's awesome. So the thing that got me when I was playing around with it to get it installed was and this, I guess, is just because of the whole trying to get another browser to support it, is that I had to go in to get Mac to accept the new DNS or trust it or something. And I was curious, is there a workaround with that? So this is something that I could do in Brave, with an extension, kind of a one-click install, let it run, and it does its thing, and then I can put a key into my browser, and boom, I can see Carvalho's website. Or
I would say we could make it easy to do that, but ultimately, it most likely would be in the form of running a desktop application. So, in other words, we can make a little small application that installed the DNS requirements in the background and ask you for permission for whatever things you need permission for. But then you'd be running this little application in the background. And at that point, it's if you're going to force your users to run an application, why not just build a desktop
application? Just give them the application.
Yeah.
And we're definitely in the era of apps and stuff. So it's not weird for, that to be the case. So yeah, it makes sense.
We're just starting with the web format, mostly because we know that app stores won't approve this app. You're going to be able to pull data from any endpoint, and you're going to be able to purchase things.
And there's not really anybody can do about it.
Right. Yeah. There's nothing I can do about it, etc. The only thing that Synonym is going to be able to control is the data that you host with us. So we will provide, when we launch PubKey app, for example, we will provide a kind of public home server that you'll be able to make an account, store data on. But this is more like having a Google Drive than having a Twitter account. And so other providers can easily pop up and say, no, we're going to provide the data. and or you can host it yourself, for example. Yeah.
Okay, so some people still have problems with PWAs. Are you actually going to are you still going to submit it as like just kind of like a web-based app to iOS and stuff?
I don't think iOS
Okay.
lets you submit a PWA.
Okay.
I think their the web browser and OS support some of the PWA paradigm. There's probably even some difference between what iOS and what Apple supports versus what Google supports. But yeah, we're actually just learning to do the PWA aspect now. Like we've made the application as a website, but now the added features of a PWA, like most users will just know as, oh, I can put it on my desktop and it'll behave just like an app when I open it. That's really what the main aspect
and if you just
of PWA.
go to the main website or whatever, you just have them like, you can prompt them to like do the button. It's like
right. Like if you open it in your web browser, the problem is that now you're going to have like the web browser UI on top of the PubKey UI, and PubKey is a little bit like a web browser. So now you're going to have like two search bars, and it just looks weird. And so the idea is to like use it as a PWA so it opens in full screen. And there are also a lot of other cool little perks with PWA that we can experiment with, like isolating the data from the browser. There's these things called workers that have certain features. So you can't do a full application like you would a native application, but it has more features than just a website. There are a couple of things they give you access to in the system. So we'll try to leverage those as we progress.
Interesting. Is it even worth in your mind to have like a iOS app and like submit it and go through all that?
No, not in this case. Because we've seen it before. I believe there was an app that did like a Bitcoin eBay or something called Haven. You may remember. They were called Open Bazaar before that. And I don't. And they had their own little tricks for rendering the data and whatever. But I don't know whether I don't remember what flack they were given, but in the end, like we are going to allow people to be making accounts without Apple's intervention, buying things without Apple being able to be Apple Pay being the solution.
40% cut. Good God.
And I don't want to have to integrate all that stuff anyway. It just doesn't make sense for something that's supposed to be a self-sovereign application.
Sweet. As much as like I will be doing like an iOS.
Maybe we do a desktop native app. That I would be open to at some point.
Okay.
If there was a good enough reason to it. Like for example, like you mentioned doing the drive.
I'm still a desktop junkie. I still love.
I don't have any problem with desktop apps, especially like for example, if we end up we have another app called PubKey Ring, which is just an authentication app it's like just the basic key management and logging in. And so that's going to be like a application, just a simple application that we're releasing.
That's the other thing.
App.
Okay.
So yeah, we will have that as a real app, but you can imagine that, it's supposed to have that. And now people want that for desktop. And then people want like a PubKey Drive sort of application. Well, once you have a PubKey Drive application and a key application, you're getting close to just making full on desktop applications. So I don't know. We'll piecemeal it for now and only make things as necessary. But if this becomes popular and used by a lot of people, I'm sure you'll see many formats of applications.
Sweet. The PubKey Ring actually brought up a good point. Is or put me back on my train of thought that I lost. Was the encryption and HTTPS and stuff. Is this literally just encrypted? Are connections encrypted to the PubKey, like during the creation, or
it'd be better for you to ask my devs the specifics of this? But what I'll say is that I know that that last month they added TLS support, and so there are and also self-signed digital. I don't know. This is like out of my area of expertise, to be honest. But
yeah, the certificate thing always wigs me out because like I know that's like a thing, and I was curious how that interacted with
my
DNS.
blanket answer is that yes, we have tried to
PKDNS.
make it so you can use HTTPS and use the web as you already use it. We're trying to make assumptions that we're not going to be able to convince everybody to run native applications. We're not going to be able to convince app stores to submit apps. And so we're just saying, okay, people are going to use web browsers, and that's going to be how they're going to access this, or the most reliable way to access this. So it's got to be as compatible as possible with web browsers. And so, it's not a specific answer to you. It's my own ignorance, but I think that our developers would probably give you a much more complicated version of that answer.
Okay. Now the authentication thing is also really interesting. And one of the things that, maybe this is actually a shift. I want to get your take on Nostr and where Nostr is right now, and where do you think it's, because Nostr still, in my mind, has a lot of momentum and a good network. But one of the things that stuck out to me in PubKey when I was first digging into it is that you guys have sought to tackle the things that everybody talks about. This is going to be possible with Nostr, and this is where we should go with the whole web of trust and the delegation of keys and subkeys and all of this stuff. Like this kind of easily being able to access and find anybody anywhere, but that they're still like nascent, like they're still kind of in like very naive implementations of it. Whereas basically with PubKey, that's all you guys have done. Like y'all have just been like, yeah, this is the stuff. And you guys have built that, at least from what I've seen. I mean, the demo from the other day, I watched the one that was sometime in towards the end of December, I think it was, with just being able to generate keys and have a new identity and just select and like go, and then you can create. So the idea that you can have like a master key that you don't actually have to still having to paste master keys all over the place. Like that is really, really frustrating. I can see that.
Serious. Yeah. It's not a serious approach. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to hear your take on kind of the state of that and what that solution is, or is PubKey a replacement for it, or is PubKey something that can solve this for Nostr and work with it? Like what's the integration and your thinking around it?
I mean, the general answer is yes. And then otherwise the nuance is going to be, it depends who you ask. But you're asking me, right? So so what I'll say is, first, I'll disclaim that I am somewhat ignorant to the Nostr scene. You know what I mean? Like I only started using it a couple months ago, and mostly just for research and comparison purposes. I really did not ever use it. I didn't really have much need. People would send me a link. I could see what it is. It's basically like, we had a Bitcoin Slack for a while where everybody tried to invite everybody into one Slack. Then we had Bitcoin Mastodon, and everybody tried to invite everybody to Bitcoin Mastodon. And Bitcoin Nostr feels like that. You know what I mean? It feels like it's still mostly a Bitcoin chat room. And that's just a cultural commentary. And again, I did disclaim that I'm not like deep into the scene either on the dev in the startup level or on the user level. Like I just have my own superficial exposure for my own biased purposes. So yeah, that disclaimer being repeated, I'll say, we've been working on this effort since before Nostr existed. We collaborated a bit and tried to hire some of the people that ended up making Nostr. And we had a very similar strategy and plan for how to get what was formerly called, what's kind of called PubKey, and older iteration called /tags, thinking, okay, well, we can bootstrap through Bitcoiners because they know what keys are. So we've always had this plan. It's just that we didn't get rug pulled so much as, somebody did it before us and did it with some success before us. But in analyzing the design of Nostr and looking at our requirements, especially as we learn to define our own requirements better, it just didn't meet our requirements. There's too many shortcuts. There's too many excuses to keep things overly simplified, to the detriment of being actual solutions. And so I think that it's amazing what they've done as a culture, as a group, the gravity they created for themselves, with a little luck from, hype from Jack and mistaken hype from Elon. But I think it's been great to watch. It's been a real learning experience for me as well as them. But their designs are lacking. You have to paste your key into everything. The assumptions about how they will prevent centralization and censorship are just kind of hand wavy. And some of the decisions they've made are a little bit more arbitrary than they'd like to admit. Like things like signing all the data brings just as much problems as advantages. It's just not actual a feature. Like we could do the same thing in PubKey if we wanted, but we don't because we don't need to. Because we have the key discovery method. And so we can do key delegation. We don't have to, you can have sub keys, you can have multiple accounts, etc. You can't do that. Like an example that came up recently was, hey, should we have a Synonym Nostr account? I was like, well, it would be just my account because there's no way to like have delegation. Like I can't, what happens if I give it to, a specific person on the team and the social media guy, and then he quits. Now I have to share the key with multiple people. Like it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's a huge limitation there that still hasn't like. And there was like an insect bunker tool that Pablo I think built, and it was like the right idea, but execution was clunky. Like I never even got it to work. For some reason, it wouldn't want to connect. But that's like a perfect example of where, like, I would immediately, in thinking about what that solution would look like, I would immediately be like, I'd jump on PubKey because, like, if I could find discovery between my devices
and
easily
no reason
or whatever,
why they
like
couldn't.
I could have something like that.
Well, there is
I could
reason.
do delegation. Yeah.
So we told the Nostr community about this method of using DHT as a DNS more than a year ago, I think. And they weren't very interested. And the big blocker, that's no pun intended. The big blocker there is just simply that it's it would be a breaking change to use this method because, for in my opinion, arbitrary reasons, they're using the SecP 256 curve, which is the same curve as Bitcoin. But they're not really getting any on like true. They'll tell you there's advantages and reasons that are going to do it that way, blah, blah, blah. But none of them are going to be significantly different or better than just using the ED 2159 keys like we use. And those are the keys. That's the key.
What kind of keys do y'all use?
ED 21559.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And that's the curve that's required to do this method in mainline DHT. So they would have to change the key type to be able to do this, which would mean all the old keys can't do this. And of course, it'd be other work in the, having to make the applications check through this DNS method instead of, other methods. Basically, they'd have to give up some of the simplicity and some of the conveniences to have censorship resistance. And that's the choice we made. So if they wanted to, they totally could use PubKey as their key method. They could ignore our home servers and other things that we do if they really wanted. But in the end, somebody was saying, oh, why don't you talk to the Nostr devs about this? Why don't you submit a NIP? And I was just like, well, they've made it clear they're not interested. So I'm not into forcing people to do things. I'm not going to persuade or coerce them or whatever. It's like we made a thing and we're going to keep making the thing with or without them. It would be great if some of them want to join us and help us or improve on our work, but it's not a requirement. And so if they want to do their own thing, fine. And they were like, well, but you should still submit a NIP just so it's there, they know, and maybe it'll work. Well, it's like PubKey, all of PubKey is our NIP for Nostr. Like if you want an Nostr 2.0, that's what we would say, here's PubKey, and all the things that it entails, the applications, the social tagging, the social graph, which is stuff we haven't talked about yet, how we do indexing, all of it. Like because we had to make it all ourselves, we had to choose, make design decisions from scratch. And so we could compare to our peers. We could say, here's how Blue Sky is doing it. Here's how Web5 is doing it. Here's how Nostr is doing it. But and here's the problem with all of those. And can we find a good niche and different experiment that we think is better? And that's really what's important, is just to do something that other people haven't done and try to see if we can actually solve the problem, because it hasn't been solved really.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was curious about keys because I didn't understand exactly how that worked. that stuff gets a little bit over my head. And one of the things that like drive, like, because I've been trying to figure, I still feel like one of the big problems with a lot of these things is still key management, in the sense of like, how do you, without just like creating a key and making someone carry it around and stick it into things, how do you solve it so that you can have a key offline that basically controls and attests to the keys that are online?
Right. So you could leave your pub key, your master pub key, you could leave it cold if you really wanted to. Now, we need to make our tools more robust to make all of this, what I'm about to describe, practical. But yeah, you could take your master pub key, make it cold, and then you could have delegated basically sessions with home servers. And when you make a session, you have to authenticate and you have to like approve that session with the key. But once you have the session, it's sort of like having like, when you log in a website, you have like what's called like a token. And that keeps you logged in, right? And
until
they keep
you log out. Yeah.
Right. And they keep that token
until
valid.
You clear your browser. Yeah.
Right. And they keep that token valid until you either clear your browser, sign in from another location, whatever rules they want to apply to that token, they can apply. And you can do the same thing. So you can say, okay, Jose no longer works here, so we need to revoke his access to, the PubKey Twitter, account. And so now we're going to just delete that session. So when the home server wants, somebody's trying to write to the home server or something with that session, it just doesn't work anymore. So now he's been revoked, and you can create new sessions for other people. So you could, theoretically just have no issue with actually having cold identity keys and then hot sessions.
That's awesome. That is like, that's been so needed in a lot of these different things. And it also solves so much about like backups and like the risk to things. Cause when you start making these like key systems, you end up putting your centralization risks just in a different place. Like it's under your responsibility, but you still end up, you have the same kind of insecure practices and environment and ways of interacting with a quote unquote secure interaction, but it doesn't solve the problem because you're still just, Nostr being the perfect example is I'm just sticking my keys into a bunch of different places, and I don't really have a good way around that outside of just super limiting what I use, which is kind of my only option,
Yeah. I think a lot of the, necessity is the mother of all invention, as they say. And that is part of the reason why I think that Nostr hasn't innovated in some of the more difficult areas to innovate, or more, I should say, maybe not even innovate, hasn't progressed into some of the more difficult areas or complex. Now I had a brain fart. What was I saying? Please edit this out because I've been having too many brain farts in podcasts. Sorry, what was the question you just said?
So I was just talking about like basically where and how to manage keys, and the fact that like they're necessarily insecure. Like even though I'm putting them quote unquote in my control, the interaction of like I'm not in control, like I'm just constantly going to this client and this app and like all of this stuff all over the place. That interaction and that way of working with it is still the same, except now I'm having to carry my keys around and sticking them into all those places. So it's like it needed to be abstracted away, not like in Nostr's case, it's been moved from the central server to the user, but they needed to abstract away the interaction so that the key was to the user kind of in the physical world, and then the interface, the web experience, the device and client experience was permission, or like you said, a token, a session, to basically give. I don't have my keys hot all the time to do stuff with Bitcoin. I can do all sorts of stuff until I need to send a transaction.
Why there hasn't been a lot of advancement in that in the Nostr area is actually incentive driven. This is what I was trying to say, is that necessity is the mother of all invention. So if my keys were valuable to me, I would be worried about having them hot, right? But I think that most people actually don't value their Nostr accounts that much, and they're not that. And they say, okay, well, I only have to trust, Milan and Pedro and these specific people, and I think I trust them enough. Like if they're not going to like impersonate me using my key or steal or try to hijack my key with their application. And that's it. And if I lost my Nostr account, it would be easy for me to tell everybody what my new key is, because we don't have a solution for that. So now everybody has a culture of looking out for when somebody has to change their key. So basically, because the keys are disposable, people treat it as disposable, and people don't innovate on making them permanent. And so it's almost like these are just disposable keys, which is why I started earlier by saying, like, it's not a serious thing. It's not a serious solution. It's entertainment. Like, people say, oh, I'll make a temporary account. I'll use it. Maybe it'll be like less temporary than I realized, but who cares? Like, I'll take the risk. It's, it doesn't matter. It's not important. It's disposable. But if you want to do non-disposable things, it does matter. You know what I mean? If you want to have company accounts, you want to, actually have, some sort of actual authority and access that these keys grant, that, that have special permissions to special data and special features. Like, you have to have all this stuff in place. You can't just ignore it. And so even in our case where we are pursuing it, there's so much more to do. Like you mentioned, like backups and keys, and like, people aren't that good at holding keys. We've only just kind of gotten people for the last 15 years or so to even consider it for real because of Bitcoin, because there's value there. These keys are not disposable, but they're not that good at it. They'll lose their seeds. They'll write them down in the wrong order. They'll have backup files. They'll lose the files, whatever it may be. So we have to keep innovating in this direction. I know, like, if people use this stuff, then we can do further research for stuff like Shamir secret sharing for your backups and multi-sig and all these kinds of things for identities. Like, but that's never going to happen if all you do is use disposable master keys, right? Like, you're not going to get that evolution.
Yeah, I'm curious because this got me back towards. I haven't yet explored it, and I'm hoping you have more knowledge about it than I do. BIP85 and using a set of keys as, basically a way to generate any other sort of randomness or another set of keys or anything like that. Because essentially in the network and community that I think of Nostr that I think is there, like, this is one of the biggest things. And the whole key management issue is far and away one of the biggest. Like, I think it needs to be thought about more deeply and worked on, but it's also a high risk, low reward for anybody who's working on it. It's very difficult. It's, the degree of attention that one would have to put on it and cost would be really, really high. And the risk is, if you get it wrong, everybody's going to hate you. And if you get it right, it may have a really slow uptick at the same time, because it needs to be very, very user friendly, which is increasingly very, very difficult at the same time. So, but my constant thinking is always like, how can I use one set of keys to generate these other keys? Like, could I create this on my PubKey system and create?
And this is how we did it in BitKit. In BitKit, you generate like your root seed, and then you generate the Lightning private key and /tag private key separately from that. And you could even say in Nostr, like, you could use the same seed for the libsec curve and then use that same seed again for the ed curve. And now you've got two keys from the same seed. Like, there's all kinds of things you can do, but there are cryptographic trade-offs and stuff that you have to be aware of. And so whenever you mess with this stuff, you need to be doing it through the lens of, like, experienced cryptographers, because you can be dangerous if you're somebody like me trying to be creative with seeds and private keys, because there are weird little situations where you could, like, basically expose your private key if you create too many public addresses or sign too many things. And then, in Nostr, you're signing everything. And so I always have to go back and ask someone, oh, is this one of those situations where it matters or where it doesn't matter? And that's something you have to consider with all of this. Is, you really want an expert to be talking, like you mentioned BIP85. Like, we had BitKit audited in that derivation stuff audited, and we have our derivation spec'd. And so you can do things like that. But I'll be honest, what I've kind of learned since doing things like that is there's not a lot of need for it. You really can just use one seed in a lot of cases. And yeah, you can derive things from other keys and such. But like in the end, it's if you have proper abstraction, like for example, like with these sessions, for example, like you just
Mhm.
don't need as many keys and you don't need more and more seeds for everything. Sometimes you just need to be able to find data somewhere, and one seed or one key, one public key is often good enough for that. And so I don't want to say that these are a waste of time so much as another challenge with the incentives of working on it, in addition to the cost and the risk and the expertise, is just the necessity. Until you have a lot
Mhm.
of users that this will solve a lot of problems for, it just can't be a high priority. And while Synonym is trying to do a lot at once, we also are very serious about prioritizing things to be as practical as possible. So we're not going to build third stage solutions for something that where people haven't started using the first stage yet. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now, it's difficult to wrap my head around kind of the experience of this, but obviously I see its potential. It's like one of those things where it changes the way that fundamentally things work. So it's like difficult to pinpoint exactly how it will apply until you're actually using it, until you actually kind of have it like as a tool in your hand. And this is the whole social graph and the web of trust and the tagging and all of this stuff. All of this that you've kind of built right into PubKey from the outset. And I want you to give me your rundown on the mental model for these and how you see these interacting.
So I like when you put it that way because I use the word mental model a lot, and it's very much how I think. I can't put something in my brain without putting it in the place of my mental model, and that's what makes it so easy for me to see when something doesn't fit, because it's like, well,
Mhm.
if I listen to what you're saying and I put that into my mental model, everything's broken. So you're gonna have to explain this to me and convince me, because I don't want to break 50 other things just to accept your idea.
Yeah,
Um,
I know exactly what you're fucking talking about.
But the mental model, or the kind of idea behind social tagging and the what we're calling the semantic social graph, is goes back. This is like the oldest of all the ideas in Synonym. This is something I've been working on since before Bitcoin. Um, I told this story in the past on other podcasts, so I forgive people for if they have to hear it again. But back before Bitcoin, I had a marketing company, and I was a huge fan of Google. It was like these were like the golden years of Google, where everybody wanted to work there. It was like a lore. There was the lore of like what it was like to do a job interview, and yeah, and like what it was like to work there with like ping pong tables, and you know what I mean. Like everything was just so
They
hyped.
have arcade games in the lobby, man.
But I'm not an engineer. I've never been one. I'm not a dev.
Mhm.
I have some very little programming experience, and then I quit those classes. And so I was like, all right, man, you love Google, but you're like, and I was like I bought one of like the first Google Glass, thing. That's just to like, I was like an enthusiast to the max. And I was like, you're never
That's
going to get a
funny.
job there because you're not an engineer. And so I thought, okay, like what would a non-engineer do to get a job there? And I was like, well, what I'll do is I'll invent a Google killer, and then I'll show them that here's how I could kill Google. So you should hire me.
Yeah.
And a lot of the ideas of that have actually come true through Google naturally. And basically, back then there might have been an images tab, but there was no news tab, no shopping tab. There wasn't a tab for all these different categories of data. It was just search returns.
Mhm.
And the idea that I had back then was I was building websites for small businesses. It was one of the things that we were doing. And I had to deal a lot with SEO. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like having to guess what the spec of what Google wants is only because they're worried about people gaming the spec. It's like, we don't want you to know how we sort the data, because then you're going to give us data the way we want it. It's like the whole
Yeah.
thing was just like such a mind fuck for me that I just like, it just drove me crazy that I had to like go to all these like obscure gray hat, white hat, black hat, SEO, SEM websites. The whole thing was just so
Yeah.
ridiculous. And then they kept changing it. They had first they did it a certain way, then they did PageRank, and then
They've changed it because people figure it out.
Right. And I thought to myself, it should just be the opposite. It should just be, they should totally publish everything, and they should just let the people decide what to see. And the people should be able to choose. Do I want to see only images? Do I want to see only PDFs? Do I want to see only, shopping, whatever it may be? But also by semantics. Like, I only want to see things that are tagged certain ways, et cetera. So basically just taking all of the parameters of an algorithm to where Google is trying to infer what you want to see and then show it to you. And instead just literally letting the user configure those things and tell Google what to show them, like a research mode or something like this. You could never really do research in the way you wanted to without all these types of filters and basically your own ability to weight things in the algorithm. And you can't weight things, you can't sort things, you can't filter things without some form of semantics and some form of indexing. And so, fast forward to today, from back then, the idea always stuck with me, and it's always been an underlying aspect of what we were doing with Synonym and the concept of what I wanted to do when we got to the point of kind of fixing the web. And so now you combine these ideas with, some of you may have heard of the semantic web. The semantic web was the original Web3 concept. Before we had shitcoin Web3, we had the semantic Web3, which is a concept that was kind of discussed and tried to make solutions for by some of the elders of the internet, inventors and respected people. And it never came to be. It kind of turned into this kind of I don't know if your audience is familiar with the Xanadu project, but that's another rabbit hole you should check out. It kind of became like a Xanadu thing where nobody could really do it. It was like an endless project that would never ship. It was just impossible to actually get it to work in a practical way. Well, I'm picking up the torch on that. So the idea is that, now that we have this capability for people to define who they are in a self-sovereign way, that, they define the data, they define things, and they represent themselves as a key, you can do everything in an inherently kind of signed way without actually signing everything. You can do everything in a kind of inverted way where instead of, say, asking Synonym to show you a feed that is what we think is the best feed for you based off of inferring how long you looked at something and what you clicked on and blah, 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 you do it. You do it, and then you do it combined with the other people in your social graph that you want to include. And so the idea is that instead of asking Google, what you're doing is you're saying everybody is tagging everything all the time. They're tagging other keys, tagging other people, and they're tagging other URLs, basically, files, posts, whatever it may be. Any type of data you would find in Google or on the web. And they're tagging these things as a curation method, as a review method, as just a semantic method of just saying has to do with this idea. And so I could tag you as Bitcoiner, I could tag you as podcaster, I could tag you as wears glasses, or whatever I want to, I can tag you in these ways. And then when people are basically filtering the graph, so you think of the web as just all of the URLs that are inside of an index, because that's ultimately what you have to compile it to. It's just one index. That index is a graph, and the way that edges, basically the way things connect on the graph, is through semantics. And so basically, when I tag, you, then that creates a connection between you and I on the graph. If I follow you, whatever, then now you're part of my friends. You know what I mean? You're in my inner circle. And so when in PubKey app, there are basically tools to make it easy as possible for people, instead of zapping, instead of liking, instead of upvoting, they just put anything they want. And so if you want there to be a heart button, you just leave a heart emoji as a tag, and then other people can click that button and add heart emojis to it too. If you want to add a Bitcoin tag, you can type the word Bitcoin, or you can put in the Bitcoin symbol, or you can type BTC. Doesn't matter. You just put whatever you want, and other people can pile on and add that tag as well. And so it makes it really only the first tagger has any effort at all. And then the other people are just clicking which tags they agree with about that post. And so so instead of doing a search, what you actually do is you're taking a perspective on the graph. You're saying, show me all the graph data from this view. Yeah, from this view. And well, it's more than a filter because you also, well, it is a filter, but it's
You're
also
looking outward
by
from somewhere on the
distance and by
graph.
weight. Yeah. So you're
Yeah.
looking at all the things that you can see. And so you can't see everything. And you want to filter down everything from what we would call the fire hose, like all the data, and organize it into something that's a usable stream. But you create the streams. We don't create the streams. You create them. You say, okay, I'm going to, all people that I've tagged Bitcoin and all posts that they have that are tagged, I don't know, podcasts, I'm going to make a feed and call it Bitcoin podcasts. And I'm going to look at that feed just to see if there are ever any things that are trending as new Bitcoin podcasts among my friends. So you can do distance as well. You could say my friends, my friends' friends, my friends' friends' friends, if you want to keep extending out the network.
6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Right. Well, I heard that there's a study that shows that since Facebook on the internet, there's only 3.5 degrees between any people. And so we're super connected online.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be too difficult to create these relative networks of webs of trust or semantic graphs, social graphs with the people that are relevant to you. And so it's kind of like a relevance system. It's like instead of search, you're just trying to match things, match people with the data they're looking for, with the people they're looking for through the people they trust. This is the foundation of when I say replacing big state. So big state provides regulation. Like the only thing you can't supplement digitally is violence. You know what I mean? There's no way to actually have physicality in the digital realm. You can have physical consequences. In other words, I can have a drone that goes and finds you, and I can instigate things digitally. But that's the only thing you can't solve. But you can solve governance. You could have any sort of consensus that you want to achieve. Anything like this could be done through social graphs. And so that's what we're trying to show is like how to digitize trust in a way that gives the user a way to actually wield it and apply it to what they're doing.
If you want to save in better money and you want 20,000 sats for free right now, it's about $20 at $100,000 of Bitcoin. Check out Fold. Every time I swipe this card, I get 0.5%, sometimes 1, sometimes even 1.5%. I can get 2, 3, 5, even 10% on gift cards with major merchants. Between the roundups, the gift cards, the auto stacking, the sats back on every single swipe, Fold literally does all of the work for me, and it is denominated in Bitcoin. And I have more savings just by using this card than like 90% of the United States normal consumer. I've got a referral link for you right here. Shout out to Fold for sponsoring my work and honestly being the most important service for my being on a Bitcoin standard. From my perspective, where I immediately want this is in sorting out like the number of times that I lose stuff or I can't go back and find like I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out my own tagging system just to sort through stuff that I've saved. And that's been my biggest thing about social media is that I save stuff constantly.
Yeah. The funny thing is, like, people say to me, "Oh, people are never going to do this. It's too much work. It's too much mental load." I'm like, "You already do it. I'm looking at my browser right now. I have about 12 different tab groups, each one with at least 5 to 20 tabs inside of it. Each one with a label, colored. You know what I mean? Like, and they're all categorized. Like, we're sorting. All we're doing is trying to take the noise of the internet and filter it down to something that interests us or entertains us or solves our problems."
Mm-hmm. And having a universal way, that's really the big thing, is that if this could be made useful personally, like if I can make it useful to me, just in the way you were just talking about your tab groups, right? Is that if that was provided as some sort of a tagging system through PubKey or within the PubKey environment, so that you could get to that later, so that you could find those things. And like, this is something that I could use to sort my information. And then other people can simply leverage that which I've built for myself. Mm-hmm. So my question then is, where do the tags live? Exactly.
So all the data lives on a home server. So instead of, I don't know how much of your audience is familiar with Nostr or different formats, but instead of having a bunch of miscellaneous relays or servers that might have your data or have some of your data or whatever, in PubKey, there is a primary home server. So when the convention, at least, we can't force people to have only one. People can have as many as they want. But the convention that we use within our applications is to assume that there is a home server. And so when I go and look up your key in the DHT, I'm looking for the server where I'm going to find all your data. And then that way, yes, we could define fallback servers, things like this, but they should be mirrors. They should be redundant. They should not be the actual, main server that is the provider. You need a main provider. And so because of that assumption, you can always assume and you can say, okay, like this is the server. This is where I go to find the data. This is where I would find your payment endpoints, your contacts, whatever data you're looking for. If that fully answers your question.
Gotcha. Okay. So in that instance, how does that relate to the IDs and the sessions and the subkey thing that I saw in the demo?
So the session is with the home server, right? So in other words, it's just like a normal web server. If you're logged in, if you're authenticated into the home server, you will get a session with that home server. And so now you can write to that home server or whatever permissions that home server is providing you for that token. You may have more limited permissions. It all depends on how robust we make it and how much people use this stuff. The more tools we'll make for managing permissions, access control, etc. But ultimately, it's a centralized server. So when you run it yourself, you'll control everything. You decide who can read what, whether you can put any kind of rules on there you want to. When you use, say, Synonym's home server, we decide what the rules are. And so, for example, in order to legally provide a server out to third parties, you have to be regulated. And so we have to moderate. And so we have to look for CSAM, not objectionable, illegal content. And we have to remove it, or at least not provide access to it directly from ourselves. And so so we have to do that. And so if you don't like that, then you have to find somebody else to host it that will do that for you, or you have to host it yourself. This is just how the web works. But yeah, and so your home server is just where you would find the data for your tags. But remember, this is all a social graph. So in the end, you're going to need at least one indexer or multiple indexers. End users are probably not going to want to be indexing things themselves. Most people don't run their own web crawlers and these kinds of things, right? So Synonym will also run an indexer, but again, our indexer is going to be subjective to our biases, what we want to appear in there. And so if we censor things, the host always has the power to censor, whether you host the indexer, you host the server. And so if you don't want to be censored, you got to host it yourself. It's peer-to-peer, right? But if you do get censored in our system, you have alternatives, right? You have a credible exit. So yeah, the tags are ultimately stored in your, as items in your data, but the indexer is what's actually compiling all these things together in a way that you can use it.
Gotcha.
Serving these views for you.
Is an indexer, so to speak, part of the stack in the sense that, like, could I run my own indexer just by downloading PKDNS and PubKey, like all the PubKey?
Could you run your own? Yes. Is it practical at the moment? Not really. Was there any reason to do it? Well, only if you wanted to run your own instance of the whole PubKey stack. In other words, you wanted to provide PubKey app to people as competitor to us, then you'd be incentivized to do that because you'd want to have control of your own indexer. You wouldn't have to. You could actually run your own instance of PubKey app and just use our indexer if you really wanted to. But again, you would be subject to our rules, not your own rules. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So as far as like running the whole stack, I wouldn't say it's practical for anybody to run as many indexers as you would want or anything of that kind of thing. Like what we're trying to show, what we're trying to demonstrate first is just one instance of everything and a hosted instance of everything. So because that's what most people will use. Most people are not going to host things themselves. Most people are going to trust. And we're just trying to say, here, you can trust us more safely than you could in other situations.
Gotcha. Oh, man. Did I miss anything else specifically in regards to PubKey that I should know about in relation to kind of the direction that I've been attacking these things from? Because I'm looking to start playing with this, but I know like that's just not available yet. You're going to have a private beta soon. Is that right?
Yeah, where we plan on finishing up the internal testing this month. And then probably the first or second week of February at the latest, beginning the private beta.
Sweet.
Yeah. The private beta, I don't know how long it will last. Depends on how much it crashes, I guess, or how bad it goes. But I think it will go pretty good. And yeah,
I'll do my best to break it.
yeah, that's the idea. From the private beta, then we'll probably go into an invite code mode where the people that were in the private beta will be able to invite people. This is partly for legal reasons. We can't go fully public, make it public accessible until we have all of the moderation features that legal requires. So until we know we can cover our ass for providing a server, we can't provide the server publicly. But that's another project that we've begun this month as well. I just don't know. It's going to be a decent amount of work. So it might be March before we do a public beta, would be a guess. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But all the code is already open source, everything except for PubKey app. So you can run PKDNS.
Okay, so it's just the PubKey app that's private.
Yeah, even the indexer is open. But there's nothing to point the indexer at the moment because PubKey app isn't open yet. But all aspects of PubKey are in the open right now, except for PubKey app. That's only because it's broken and we don't want people to use it yet. But as soon as we have a first usable version of it, that will be public too.
How are connections made? Okay, so let's say right now I wanted to host myself my own personal website on my Linux machine, and then get access to it from my laptop or something far away. Do I still have to port forward in that instance, or does the DHT get around that?
You'd have to ask the devs. I generally speaking, you'd have to be running some sort of or trusting some sort of PKDNS resolver, right? You need something to resolve that DNS for you. If you're going to do it yourself, then that means you need to be running PKDNS or some equivalent implementation of it on that device. So you would need to be running it, is my somewhat of a guess. But yeah, if you want to do it self-sovereignly, I think they also were talking about doing DNS over HTTPS was another thing they're doing. I'm a little bit behind because I was really sick for a week or two, and then I also had a vacation, and so I'm still playing catch up. But yeah.
Well, sweet. Okay.
I would encourage you to join. We're having, I don't know if we're going to do it monthly, but we have a public dev call. So I'd encourage you to join that or chat.
I watched the recorded one for the last one. When's the next one? Do you know off the top of your head?
Probably the end of the month, depending on if something else disrupts that. But yeah.
Well, I'll put it in the show notes, and I'll also put the group that we're in. Is it just PubKey, and then there's PubKey Core?
I think the app group is called Get PubKey or PubKey app. I'll look at it right now. And then the coding, the dev group is called PubKey Core.
Okay, cool. All right, I'll have that in the show notes too if anybody else is
PubKey
trying to check
chat.
this out or wants to.
So for PubKey app, if you want general PubKey topics, it's PubKey chat is the name of the room in Telegram, and then it's PubKey Core for devs.
Sweet. Okay, so what do you see as kind of the first, because I have my own, I guess, bias, or I have my own how would I use this, or how do I think about where I could plug this into or make use of this in PearDrive, or could this marry with Nostr in some way? That's most of my framing for how to utilize this either now or very early on is, and then also sorting out and tagging and organizing my own data, which is a huge challenge that drives me crazy. But how do you see kind of the first layer interaction with this, when PubKey app comes out? Do you see it mostly as a kind of social interaction tool? Because BitKit is one of the coolest things about BitKit was always the contact list to me, is that I could just add a contact and then I could pay them later. I could do, it was just there, and it wasn't attached to anything else. And peer-to-peer was just that. It's cool. I own a contact list, it's just weird because I don't really in most other environments. But in that instance, like what's the first thing for PubKey, and or how does it interact with BitKit, or will BitKit change to interact with it, that sort of thing?
Like I said earlier, you kind of have to start with foundational stuff first and then build it on top of that. And you mentioned, what's the first layer? So I think that there's that calling things social media is a bit of a meme at this point. That like a lot of things we call social media are just
everything's social
when people are interacting on the web. You know what I mean? Like, is the chat at the bottom of a blog, is that social media? Is Reddit social media? Is Instagram social media? Like, there's all these variations of how people are interacting in different platforms, and then people just calling them all social media. Well, I think the web is social media. You know what I mean? Like anything that more than one people are, it's a network. You're connecting peers. Like, it's all social. I think that social media, the original name was more meant to be that it was casual and it was socializing, but nobody socializes on the web anymore. It's like you go on Twitter to argue, to get news, to get feedback. It's not socializing. It's not like, hey, I'm looking for somebody to have lunch with.
What's up? Who's hanging out?
Yeah. What do you think about my painting?
Anybody on Twitter today?
It's
what
not
are you guys doing?
Some of it is that there are very casual users, but mostly not. People are pretty intensively using this thing we're calling social media. So this is like my disclaimer, because yes, PubKey app is going to look very much like a social media app. It's going to look very much like a Nostr app. Well, in my opinion, it'll look a lot better because we're really focused on making the design. Well, we do have we are the cathedral and Nostr is the bazaar, right? Like, they have the advantage of chaos and quantity and mutation. We have the advantage of planning, organization, dedicated funding, dedicated roles. Like, and we're leaning into that. We're just trying to say, like, let's try to figure out how to do this in the way that we would do it.
I need to read that book again. It's been a while. Reminded me.
We started somewhere. I forgot where we started.
Just talking about like what's the interaction going to be with
the first layer,
and kind of the first thing, and then BitKit relationship.
Right. So at first, there's going to be a lot of separation between BitKit and PubKey, but eventually total integration. The reason is that we're currently rewriting BitKit. We wrote it in React Native, and we use that for both iOS and Android. But we're rewriting each one into native applications for each platform. And so that's a very long process, takes a lot of work. And so we don't want to put too many things in BitKit until that's done, because it'll have to be done again in the new apps twice. So it's BitKit is featured kind of not in a feature freeze. We're probably going to be integrating BitRefill soon. But BitKit's only going to get a few features over the next 3 to 6 months. We're just going to try to keep it stable, trying to promote it, to get to more users. But then after PubKey and BitKit reach certain stages, then we will begin integration of them. And so the first layer is just going to be using the first impression, the first stage is just going to be people using PubKey, much like you might use a Nostr application, with some notable differences, like the social tagging, the social graphing, the design approaches. We're kind of rethinking everything as far as like how we would present this to people, because I do want people to feel like, okay, this is like Google, except it's like X. You know what I mean? It's like if Google was inside X, and X wasn't just about interacting, it was about tagging, a link to a news article or tagging a file. It's more like, it includes the Google aspect as well as the social media aspect. It just combines them. And so that's how I would picture. I would say it's like, what if Google and X were the same thing? And that's kind of what we have here. So it's like a publishing platform, a search platform, and a social platform. But that's all just the first stage, because where I actually want to go with this is to make all of the different types of posts and interactions in PubKey app monetizable in more than one way. You may remember I did the biz.pro podcast. And I had the crowd walls. Like, I want to bring that back as a monetization option, as well as typical monetization options. And so
No, that was really fun. That was a super neat idea.
The end game is that users will choose different monetization methods for different post types. And so you'll have multiple post types. And eventually this is just like, now it's like, okay, what if Google was inside of Twitter? Well, what if everything on Google could have a price tag on it, or a monetization button, or a buy button, or unlock button, or whatever it may be? Any of the ways you could think of that you would want to have e-commerce, you can now combine that, like Google's shopping section, for example, or these kinds of things. So it's like, we really are trying to cover a wide scope here. We have to do the kind of social media stuff first, because that's requirements that are part of doing the e-commerce stuff. And what we want is to make it so people can have their own economy, whether the government wants to censor them, whether Synonym wants to censor them. It doesn't matter. That as long as somebody's willing to host your data, that you're going to be able to connect with the people you're looking for and do commerce with them.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So for anybody who doesn't know, the Biz podcast that he was talking about was really cool. The focus was all like specific people in business. Like, you were talking with them like very deliberately about like how to build, like how to execute things in entrepreneurship, basically. Like it was a much more focused rather than like kind of a general conversation, from what I remember. And what you had was, you would have it like, you have to pay 1 million sats, which I think was like $100 at the time, to unlock the next episode. And anybody could contribute to it. So I could go up there and I could throw 10,000 sats, and then somebody else throws 50,000 sats, and somebody else throws 21 sats. And when it hits 1 million sats, it unlocks, and now everybody can listen to the episode.
Right.
And it was just it was a really interesting and unique thing at the time. I had not seen anybody else do that specifically, because everybody was looking for like a new monetization method, and like zaps and
the community ultimately settled on the value for value meme and the zaps meme. I don't think I think all zaps is just tipping reborn. I don't think tipping is a solution. I think it's a feature, but I don't think it's like going to change the way social media works. Or I actually think that tipping information on posts is not that valuable. It's not worthless, but it's certainly not as valuable as like a semantic tag where you can literally explain how you feel about it. You know what I mean? So yeah, anyway.
I think it's actually a combination. I think attaching the literal value to it, and in fact, there could be interesting an amount of like, so maybe this is actually leads me to a question. So in PubKey, like let's say I'm following 20 people, and you I get something through you or whatever, and you tag it as a podcast, and then I look at it and it's a Rickroll video, and I'm like, oh, you son of a bitch, and like, so can I like negative tag it as a podcast so that it doesn't show up in my podcast? And based on like,
depends on your definition of a negative, right? Like, for example, you could say bad tagger or scammer, or in other words, you could give me any affirmative tag that meant something negative. And that's one way you could do it, is just designate me more accurately. You could also remove tags from me. So if you had tagged me as, Bitcoiner or, critic or whatever. Right. And you could remove those tags. But I think what you're getting at, which is currently not a feature, but a planned feature, is weighting. And so, yes, you would want to also be able to add a weighting to a tag and be able to say like how much that tag matters. Just for example, like if you were say you were filtering a view of a feed, and you were saying, okay, I want this feed to include people that I've tagged as Bitcoiners and posts that are tagged as Bitcoin. Well, you might say, and then also posts that are tagged as Bitcoin mining. You might say, well, what I actually care about is the Bitcoin mining. So I'm going to weight that, fully. And I'm going to kind of de-weight, other Bitcoin tags that I might want still included. And so this way it would, change the weighting of things and how much frequency of that data you see of that type. And so weighting is a bit more tricky, because weighting is something you hope to find a way to infer, because you don't want people literally trying to like, all right, I have to tag a thing and I have to decide a weight for every single tag that I make. It gets impractical, right? And so more of this can be inferred through your social graph of your connections, right? So, for example, people you follow have one kind of degree of connection with you. If they follow you back, now they kind of have another degree. They're your friends, right? And then the people they follow have another degree, and the people those people follow have another degree. So that the distancing acts almost sufficiently enough as a weighting. But I do agree that it would be interesting and useful to actually have weighting capability, especially if you're really trying to like curate things in a very specific way.
Yeah. Now I'll say something about the zapping thing, because when money is integrated in this and you have a way to pay and do commerce and stuff, is I actually think, I mean, I totally agree with you. Zapping is just tips with a new brand. But what's interesting about it to me is very similar to what we see with technology in general, is models change when you open up access to something to 100 times as many people. And the idea of YouTube wasn't like some profound change in the quality of production. It was about the fact that if you didn't, like, nobody was going to defeat Hollywood with YouTube, but now there's this entire market below Hollywood that didn't exist prior to YouTube existing, because now I can make a 15-second video and somebody can watch it.
Yeah, I would reframe that a bit, though. I would say that YouTube and similar things were inevitable, right? Like, as we were always going to want this open marketplace where we could find all the videos sorted and searchable and et cetera. We're always going to need and want that. Yeah. I don't think that argument carries to tipping. I think that tipping is just a feature. In other words, it's not. The problem with tipping is that you can't dedupe it for, just richness. In other words, somebody can just tip something to oblivion, and now instead what you've got to do is revert to using tagging to de-weight that tipping. And so unless all you care about, in other words, if the way you want, is there any situation in life where the way you choose to make a decision is based off of how much money that entity has earned? Right? Maybe if you invest in it, you care about that. Maybe, you know what I mean? Like, but as far as like your feeds, do you actually think that that's a good signal? How often do you use sort by tips other than as a curiosity? Like, is that actually how you look at your feed? Do you sort it by tips? I doubt it. Maybe you click on it once in a while.
I think about it as like most active or most liked. And this is actually my argument too, is because what I was saying as far as my argument wasn't, I hadn't actually kind of closed the loop, is my point is that the thing about quote unquote value for value or tipping online that is actually profound is the fact that I tip things and I zap things that I never, ever in a million years would have prior to how I interact with Nostr.
Well, the question is more, how does that help other people? How does that help the third party?
How does it help a third party? Just because they see what I like more than, like, if I like something, I can like it. But if I like something that's crap, if I like something that I like sort of like versus something that I really, really like it's kind of like a weight.
Yeah. I almost use it more as a negative indicator. Like if I see Odell tipping 2,222 sats to his buddies or the companies he's invested in and their CEOs. It's just like, okay, man, I get it. Cool. Like, and if somebody did that to me, like they would probably be doing it to troll me or something because I made fun of zaps. There's all this like it's mostly
I'm
about
zap you for making fun of zap
memery or whatever,
But that's kind of the thing, though, is that like I do see it as another social layer.
It's a signal. I just don't know. I think that when you actually compare the signal to something like semantic tagging or social graphs or whatever, you're going to realize that it's one of the worst signals of your options, because it's gameable, right? Like somebody can just put more money. You can fake identities. Like you end up all of the actual useful filtering you do is going to be done by your trust system, not by the money.
No, 100%. It is based on who I trust that is zapping.
Yeah.
Like you give an example of Odell, is that that's because you think you have an idea of what Odell's motives or like your trust with him changes your weight on the zap. Same thing would go. Is that like if somebody trusts or what they think about my zapping, like I wouldn't just like trust, oh, this has like 1 million zaps. If it's like a whole bunch of people that I don't know, I wouldn't have a relationship to that. Like it would be meaningless, like you say.
Mm-hmm. But my argument is simply that Odell tagging great idea, or you have my support, or good job, bro, or best company. We know him actually giving any context is just as valuable, if not more, than whatever that tip was to the third party.
And it usually comes with a repost anyway. So.
And then if we talk about the receiving party, well, I think you as a podcaster, I'm hoping, would admit that you would not be able to do what you are doing through tipping. You need actual sponsorships, actual sources of income, and that the tipping maybe at best is like a nice surprising bonus once in a while. And that's going to be true at every level. The only level that's not true is maybe like if you're in a really, really poor country and you could use this as a way to kind of climb out. That I could see maybe me not having the best argument against. If somebody tipping on Nostr is receiving $3 of Nostr tips is meaningful to them, I can't really fault that. But I'm not saying that this feature shouldn't exist. I'm saying we just should be careful putting so much weight and betting so much on that feature, because that feature has come and gone like 5 times in my Bitcoin life, and I've seen it. Like people hype it up, people fund the startups do the best they can for 1 or 2 years, and eventually they disappear. And I think the same thing will happen again for anyone that leans too much on tipping.
Yeah, and there's definitely a kernel of truth there, but the frictionless like nature of money is just really interesting, because the tips.
Well, it's all trusted, right? That's why it's frictionless.
I mean, sure. But it's one of those things, lower the barrier to entry. Is what optionality does the user have? Is everybody having to use the Nostr wallet, or is everybody using whichever wallet they choose? Like in that sense, like BitKit, I could use BitKit to pay a Lightning invoice easily. So in that same sense, it has opened itself into this new space, and it is definitely more meaningful than it has ever been. And the network and community is still very small. So it makes me wonder, on a long enough, if the trend stays and on a long enough timeline, how does it change things for small to medium size kind of personalities, or like just like businesses and operations? Does it open up a new flow of funds that actually becomes meaningful when you're smaller, which I think is a critical part of how technology continues to decentralize things against kind of the tendency to centralize. Is when you drop the barrier, what you end up doing is making it easier to climb the rung, so to speak. The technology makes the next rung easier.
Yeah. I'm not going to argue that conceptually. I'll just say that in practice, it just doesn't really pan out that way, in my opinion. Like, I think that they're like we already said, like the main people that would be able to carry themselves out of a financial situation using zapping or tipping are going to be pretty poor. But that doesn't mean it's not true, right? So it is definitely possible, and it also doesn't mean it's not true.
I think the whole idea is that you need to provide value that you can sell anyway. There's like somebody
right,
will actually
and
purchase,
so like, is there a big difference between like somebody getting a lot of good attention than saying I need you to pay me 50 cents a month for a subscription, or tipping them? Is there a big difference between them selling one thing per month instead of tipping? Like the differences are pretty small. And then the tipping is all facilitated for the most part through trusted censorable means. And so the issue again with giving the poor these ways to bootstrap themselves is that oftentimes it comes with huge risks of rug pulls and trust. And for example, like most zaps are done in a very trusted way. It wouldn't really be that practical to do it. Most individual zaps are totally trusted because they're just such small transactions. And the whole thing, if the whole thing is trusted and we're trying to do this across the social graph, why are we using Bitcoin in the first place? Like, why are we even pretending to use Bitcoin in the first place? Why don't we just use like a mutual credit system or something like this? I am intentionally using this as a segue because that's something that we want.
I was about to ask.
So I can keep complaining or whatever, but it's not that I don't have a suggestion. It's just that I don't know if we should talk about it because it's still very, very early.
So there's obviously a reason why it uses Bitcoin as opposed to fiat, because fiat, like, they won't give permission to do this. Like you can't, like, integration in this sort of way is just like nightmarish.
Well, the platforms could denominate it in anything, right? The actual settlement is what matters.
I mean, I'm meaning like through, like, the idea of me trying to set up Square or PayPal, like, through all of this stuff versus just getting some zaps and then shooting it to my Lightning wallet is, I mean, could not be more night and
I think
day.
what everybody's missing is the reason that PayPal doesn't do this is not because they didn't think of it. The reason they don't do it is because it costs too much and it's not practical, that the tips are not worth it, that supporting those users is not worth it. All of it is cost. The users these are users with not a lot of money that are going to complain if they have a problem. And now you're having support tickets for like 5-cent zaps and things like this, which is like a nightmare, especially if it happens at any sort of percentage of scale. It's all trusted. So it's like all of this stuff comes because you're suspending reality. And the reason why we don't have nano transactions and microtransactions is because they're literally not worth it. They just cost too much mental load. They cost too much CPU, too much storage, too much trust, whatever it may be. They're just not actually worth it. And so I would approach the problem totally holistically and say, okay, if what people actually want is to trust each other in some way to have small amounts, then we should give them that. Like, we should make an intentional system that lets them do that. And this is a recurring problem because they want to do it with zaps. They want to do it with Lightning. They want to do it with, what else is custodial right now? It's impractical. I don't know. They want to do nano transactions.
eCash. Pretty much.
Yeah, with eCash. Well, eCash is a closer thing to what I'm talking about. My issues with
closer to credit. Yeah.
Well, it is. It's just that I think eCash is also suffering a bias of Bitcoin as well. Like, it just doesn't need to be a Bitcoin thing. It just needs to be a credit thing. You do not let the users decide what to denominate it in. It doesn't matter. It's credit. Like, there should be no limitation to it. It's just data in a field. It's not actual money. And so the settlement should be separate from the payment, if that makes sense. And so that's why we're building PayKit, and why later this year we're going to do a proof of concept for something called atomicity, which is basically a successor to the idea that we had with pair credit. I don't know if pair credit is dead or not, but I don't think it's worked on, and we aren't the team that would be working on it because we don't have the qualifications. And so it requires basically the whole punch team to work on it, and I think they have a lot of other work to do before this. I'm speaking for them. I have no idea.
Crap.
All I know is that I revisited the idea, and I still need it in my atomic economy vision. I still need a solution for trusted credit, and I think that we figured out a design that fits our system better than having to rely on append logs and like this fractal append log system that we had for pair credit. And so we're going to build a proof of concept for that. I don't know if it will go anywhere or if it will be interesting to anyone else but us, but I do think that we definitely have a good strategy and design for how we think this problem could be solved outright. By combining this mutual credit system with things like PayKit for basically settlements, abstracted settlement system. I think that we can cover these things. Just might be too early for people to care. We'll see.
Now, I would say I totally agree with the idea of a credit system. It's something that I've been really interesting, and it stays in the back of my mind ever since there were discussions of pair credit, because I feel like it is one of those things that, especially when you have a web of trust and a social graph, it changes how you think about that credit. Now, I will say, and maybe I'll get you to clarify on this. You were talking about why would it be hinged on Bitcoin or whatever? Like, why would it lean on Bitcoin? I would say the reason Like this just goes back to the general money problem of you have to denominate it in something. And if we're all denominating it in different things, then we don't know how to relate or even think about receiving credit from anybody. It's rather than just being a weighted trust for some specific amount of value or that I have relationship with. We don't really have a totem anymore. If, my credit is weighted in subscriptions and yours is weighted in, hosting tokens on your website or something like that. I think it naturally and makes sense that it goes to sats or when it goes to Bitcoin.
That's where you venture into a bias, right? Because like I could say,
Mhm.
well, I prefer Ethereum or Litecoin or whatever.
Oh, sure. Then you're asking a network question. Then you're asking a monetary network question. So yes,
but it's true. In other words,
yeah,
that's the design I've presented you addresses that. The suggestion you're making does not address that. It basically says, so what, John? Let's just use Bitcoin because it's the best. It's like, okay, but some people are going to disagree with that forever. You know what I mean? There's always going to be alternative ways to denominate it. And conceptually, you're actually totally right to be averse to this idea, because what you want as an ideal is a circular economy, right? You want and what the simplest definition is to remove as much conversion as possible. And so if you denominate in 50 things, you have much conversion, right? If you denominate in one thing, you have no conversion. And conversion is where the costs come in, the middlemen come in, the censorship comes in, et cetera. It's all in the conversion because you have to involve other parties. It needs to be an order book, liquidity, whatever it may be. And so you're right that conversion is the enemy of efficiency and circular economy. But I don't know if you're wrong, but my theory and why you're wrong is that if you break down the different rules or the different kind of flows in the economic process and separate them, you actually can pull it off. You can say, okay, if I do all of the actual payments using the credit layer, and I separate the payment layer from the settlement layer. And I say, okay, so here's where we just track everything and what everybody owes everybody. And then for as long as, think of it like a lightning channel, right? Like a lightning channel, it's like, we're going to do many, many transactions. And then when we're done, we'll close it. It's the same concept. It's like for scale, for cheapness, where we have trust, where we are willing to trust across whatever denominations, whether they be Bitcoin, month subscriptions or bananas, wherever we overlap and we do trust each other, we're not going to settle. We're just going to keep a floating debt with each other. But when we do want to settle, we're going to have a mechanism that's wired into that says, okay, hey guy, that $5 you owe me in Starbucks credit, pay me. I want it now. I want an actual settlement. And then what you'll do is you'll go look up my key, and you'll look up my payment endpoints, and you'll see which methods I actually support and which ways you can actually even pay me. If I don't have a way for you to pay me in bananas, you can't settle in bananas. What you'll end up having to do is agree on a conversion rate and pay me in that. And so as long as we have a way to communicate the settlement process peer to peer, you can settle anything without the conversion. The conversion is mental instead. It's just saying, as long as I'm willing to accept a different settlement method, then the conversion doesn't actually have to happen. It's mental conversion. It's not, any sort of fee or anything like this. It's like, oh, pay me in Lightning, even though you owe me in bananas. Then the settlement, the payment layer, the credit layer works just fine, right?
I'm going to make banana credits just because of this conversation.
And the problem is that you have to do this because there are always going to be people that want to interact, but don't agree on which money system. They don't agree on who they trust. They don't agree on how much they trust. Maybe I will only trust you with Bitcoin, and I would never trust you with bananas because you're going to eat them. Like it's all subjective. So you might as well give people a totally subjective trust-based system for one thing for economy. You give them another system for settlement, and then you give them the applications to be able to coordinate these payments and these settlements. And that's how I see it. It's just basically deconstructing the whole system and then reducing it down to like whatever minimum requirements we can to keep it as self-sovereign as possible. And that's really how we approach all of our design problems, to say, what can we pull apart? What do we even need to pull apart? And what's fine the way it is? And let's fix this. Yeah.
That's a really interesting way to think about it, because what you're doing is, rather than looking at the layer of fiat money and the monetary stack that we've built since kind of the 1600s as we've become a very trusted economy, is, rather than trying to make everything trustless, which is honestly a ridiculous notion in and of itself, is you're trying to separate the centralization from the trust problem and allow people to decide and allocate trust individually, which is what a natural, it's essentially trying to take what happens in the physical world, where you trust and you interact with people and you weight information based on how you got it through that person, and making that actually work in the digital environment. Is how can you build that same sort of relationship with information and interaction in the digital world that we get in the physical world? Because right now we've had to band-aid it all through giant centralized entities that have basically taken over our trust signals, and we've had to trust them in place of our actual social graph and the actual people that we are trying to interact with.
Which has made us horrible at it. In other words, the heuristics that people use
lost it.
to distribute trust are horrible.
Yeah.
Like, we ended up, our whole political system and our whole political cultural environment online has been just like totally ripped apart. And, we had Clown World, and we had people are horrible at being able to figure out who to trust. They're just so bad at it, and they use the worst information. So a kind of side quest for me here is that I want to give people the tools so they can actually have a chance of knowing which data to care about, knowing who to trust, knowing what to trust them with and what not to trust them with. It's like, if I go to say, sorry for using an example, first thing comes to mind because people used an example before, but if I tag Safety as a Bitcoiner or a Bitcoin expert or whatever, and then I tag him as some negative, bad health advice or something like this, that allows for the nuance of people respecting him as a Bitcoiner, but ignoring him as a nutritionist. You know what I mean? And this is something I don't care either way. I think people should talk about whatever they want to talk about, but it remains true that being an expert in one thing does not make you an expert at everything. And this allows for that nuance. But instead, what we have today is people go on Twitter, they see that their friends follow people, they follow the people their friends follow. They see that this guy that said something pumpy and interesting about Bitcoin has 100,000 followers, so maybe they should follow him too. They see that this woman on Instagram has a new boob job and Botox, and she's sitting on a Lamborghini, so she must be somebody important and somebody rich. She must be relevant. And we just ascribe
I want that
all
car
this
and
relevance.
those boobs. I'm going to follow that.
We ascribe all this relevance to things just almost arbitrarily, very crudely, at least. And I think that I'm a big fan of nuance, and I think that I want to give people the ability to distinguish between these things, because that's what we're missing. Imagine COVID, but with these tools. You know what I mean? Where you see a post and you have Facebook is trying to say this is misinformation, but then all the users are saying great advice.
I don't even trust Facebook.
But you know what I mean? But imagine seeing that discrepancy where Synonym and John are saying COVID is, we need lockdowns and you need vaccinations, and this is what Synonym believes in, is censoring everybody. But then people are all moving to a different provider, tagging all of my posts as fake news and whatever, and nothing I can do about it. You know what I mean? That's
the momentum would get away from it. So, that's just wild. It's wild to think about that. Yeah.
And you would be able to imagine being able to find now that then you have a trend where we used to have hashtags, right? And sometimes we still have them, but nobody uses them. Sometimes you'd have trends maybe your audience should look at me, I'm Naval. That was a fun hashtag. But imagine now being able to actually sort by this. In other words, say somebody made an interesting hashtag about COVID-19 remedies. You know what I mean? And this was 3 years ago, and people are tagging things COVID-19 remedies, and all your friends are helping you curate which COVID-19 remedy posts are the good ones. And then you go and make a feed and you look at COVID-19 remedies tag, and you're going to see like, oh, I can take ivermectin and I can do this. And you could see that like there are people that you trust that are literally like putting their stamp on this information. Whereas before it's like, oh, I could dig in and I could look at all the likes and see if any of my friends like this, or I could, it's just your way to interface with deciding what the truth is gone. And now they want to do community notes, and it's just like community notes is just the same thing rearranged.
It's a Band-Aid. Exactly. It's a pick the top note, the best reference or something.
And who
like
picks
that,
it? And
who
designs the algorithm that picks it?
Yeah.
And who's allowed to write it? Like which things of which community notes get censored? I want to see that. Like it's the same system rearranged. Granted, it is good. They are going in the right direction of asking the users to tell, what they want instead of trying to infer. I think a huge mistake of Silicon Valley in the past, decades has just been this idea that they could ever infer what you want better than just you asking for what you want. I just think that maybe that's the way the web was, 20 years ago, where people just had no ability to articulate or use interfaces to like get what they want. But I think a lot of people are trained now and know how to use this stuff. And we don't, like Elon Musk, like being like, I want to minimize regretted user seconds. This is like a KPI or something you're trying to optimize for. It's like, okay, but why don't you just let the user like decide which things are regrettable and mark them as regrettable? And this, like, why do you want to infer everything? Why do you think that you can like analyze me to figure out what I want? It's weird.
Yeah, how are you going to build that for all of us? That doesn't make.
Well, they already did, right? But it's just their inference is always going to be biased by their preference, and so that's not solving problems for people. It's solving problems for them.
And it's something specifically used for them. Like they're not doing it for
and they're always trying to
they're
bias
it
it for some weird preference. It's like, now we want to bias it for like propaganda. Now we want to bias it for like being nice. And it's like, no, man, like I want to choose what I want to see. Maybe today I want to like read tweets from a bunch of assholes. Maybe tomorrow I want to, I want a safe space. I don't know, like just let me control it.
Yeah, dude, there's so many times in which, especially the idea that this is going to be like search as well, like this is going to be like a way to filter and find stuff, is I cannot tell you how many times like this would have been like deeply useful to the point that it would change my experience on the web as a whole. Because especially with anything politically controversial, which is basically the only things that I'm interested in, like trying to find stuff like where like so much of the stuff or information that I do, I'll do through social discovery, and then I will explicitly dig into it, and then I'll find out that, okay, this is nonsense. Okay, this is based on a video that wasn't even real, or it's a year old, like, and I'll do like kind of my first step due diligence on it. And then I will either save it to either investigate later or as a reference for something in the future. If it is ever even slightly politically unfavorable, or if it's like anything about climate change or COVID or like debt or inflation or something that I know I had and something that I swear I saved somewhere and God knows where, I go to Google, I can't find it. I type it into, I do the site twitter.com/ their username. It's not indexed. Like it vanishes like 2 months later if it's just inconvenient for the wrong people. And it is infuriating. And it's like my social graph provided this to me. Like somebody that I follow gave me a link, like shared it to me, and it is gone and I cannot find it again because the other fucking people on the internet are trying to make it so that I don't find that,
Remember when I said earlier that like the you could look at it conceptually as the popularity of data is how many copies of that data exist. And so, when you talk about something that disappears, like it doesn't mean like a decentralized system isn't going to necessarily fix that. unless more people have the data. And so, for example, in the home server model for PubKey,
if it's weighted through my social graph, it'll find the person in my social graph first who had it. And
it depends on the exact use case and what you're trying to do. Yes.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, if the data only exists on one home server and that data gets deleted, it's gone.
Yeah,
if that data only exists in one index, then you're not going to be able to search through the graphs for it. You know what I mean? If it gets censored. And so you still need basically your own internet archive, if that's the kind of expectation you have, because we often rely on the internet archive to find things that the way they used to be, and they try to keep a copy of everything. But even that is trusted, right? Like they could edit old data, they could make things up. You wouldn't really know much difference because they're their only source. And so data is not permanent. Locations are not permanent. Everything is ephemeral. And so you are going to always have to deal with a little bit of that at least, because we can't, there's going to be movies that you saw when you were, 8 years old that on VHS that you just will never see again because nobody ever digitized them and they're just gone forever.
Yeah. Dude, there's so many. God, it's weird. History is a crazy thing. How much like we lose orders of magnitude more than is left,
Well, we generate orders of magnitude too, right?
Yes. Yeah, no kidding. But anyway, I don't want to keep you forever. Like I could still go down this rabbit hole further. And there was something that you said about the whole, like, we'll hold like a little bit of credit with each other that made me think about a book I read recently. So there's a whole nother thread that I could go down, but I think we should stop it here. How are you good on time? I don't want to take your whole freaking day.
You're welcome to ask any questions. Otherwise we can do it again.
It's 4 here, and you're in Florida. It's 4 there too. I actually think I
want to know the question. So
okay. Well, so one of the comments about the credit thing, actually, and it's funny because I told this to my brother after I heard the book, or I was listening to the book, which it wasn't Debt 5,000 Years. It wasn't Graeber's book. It was something by Howard Bloom. I can't remember the name of the book right now. I'll have it in the show notes if I can't think of it. But it was this idea of breaking down how social interactions work and trust. And it wasn't through a context of like Bitcoin or everything's going to be sovereignty. It was just how does trust work between humans? And one of the things that just like totally stood out to me and just was wild was that, a lot of people think that the best way to kind of make a friend in a new neighborhood or to be neighborly is to, I'm going to go and offer you something, or I'm going to make you some food or something like that. And while that is a great way to introduce, one of the ways to actually make someone trust you is two things that are really interesting is one, to actually borrow something from them, is to actually ask them for a cup of sugar, or can I borrow your weed eater? I've got this one little spot, and then give it back and make them feel like they have provided something to you. And that actually creates this sort of mental attachment. And what was interesting about that when I was thinking about it in the context of like money and credit and everything is that you're talking about building this relationship where they feel trustworthy because of the interaction that they have had with you, and why credit is actually it's a necessary part of the economy. Is that the whole idea that you talked about with we suck at knowing who to trust and how to trust people is because we don't have a totem in everything is trust all the way down. It's turtles all the way down. So we don't have a sovereignty kind of foundation to work from anymore. So with that foundation in Bitcoin and an internet where we can actually own our own data, where we can see what sovereignty is like, well, now we begin to have these, everything's relative, right? Theory of relativity. Like if I don't know what it's like for a nice day, I don't know what a rainy day is. Like it's all dependent on if I've had a really, really nice day, I know this is a very bad storm. And in that same sense is we don't know how to weight trust. And when you start changing those kind of foundational tools and give people a way to build trust, to be sovereign, to have their own money, well, now I understand what the value of credit is. I now may actually understand the value of your credit and my ability to build a trusted economy on top of that now has a whole new avenue for waiting and understanding and kind of a new environment with new tools that we've never experienced before. And I think that fundamentally changes how all of this starts getting put back together, because suddenly we can tell the difference between a rainy day and a sunny, a beautiful day. And so now we can build our operations around preparing for the rainy day and hoping or expecting the nice day, I guess, so to speak. But I thought that was super interesting about we should all be a little bit in debt to each other, because that's how we tie ourselves to caring about same
because
goals.
we are.
And
we already are.
Yeah, because we are.
Society is trust. That's what it is. Like at its very core, if you wanted to give like a very basic trolley definition of society, you would say it's trust. Like civilization is trusting that other people will be civil and not tear your head off and maim you. You know what I mean? Like that's what society is. It's an agreement to not be violent with each other, an agreement to not deceive each other, etc. And so society is trust. And so when I said earlier that like we're trying to make an alternative digital society, it makes a lot of sense when I also add we're trying to figure out ways to digitize trust and give people ways to manage trust tools, because you can't have a society without trust, and you're certainly not going to make a different or better one without giving people better ways to manage their trust. And so that's literally what we're doing at large with our whole atomic economy vision, with PubKey, et cetera. But it's also, getting back to atomicity and the credit system that we want to build. And maybe please link the audience to the atomicity. All it is a paper at the moment, or
I was about to say, I haven't even dug into that yet. I have a link to it somewhere in my stack of stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, it's just a write-up explaining like how it would work. It doesn't actually exist yet. But what's interesting there is that what we literally are going to do is figure out how to route trust through your peers. And so imagine like how right now, when I imagine your audience know a little bit of how Lightning works in routing, eventually your Lightning network is all of the channels you could possibly send money through and receive money through. Your Lightning network is just your view of the Lightning network, right? There are other people using Lightning that are connected, that are not connected to you, that are totally separated. Like you don't know how many pockets and disparate areas of Lightning network exist because you can't know. And so when you want to route a payment or route a payment, depending on which country you're from, what you're actually looking at is all of the credit routes that you have as an option. And then you're checking which one is the fastest or the cheapest or whatever you're optimizing for. The same thing, atomicity can do the same thing. But instead of looking at routes through the channels you have open, your channels are other peers that you have credit with. And so when you want to make a payment to someone that maybe has no credit with you and you have no credit with them, you can see if there's a trusted payment route to that person that's all entirely credit-based. So for example, I could say like, okay, Guy owes me $5. Guy's brother owes me $3. Guy's brother is connected to this other guy who will, who I'm trying to pay, but I don't have any
$8.
Right. And so now what I can do is I can say, hey, can I form a payment route the same way that you would with Lightning, locking up all of these payment commitments, and then have somebody else pay the guy for me. And so it's just like Lightning, except it's all credit based. And so
that's wild.
You don't need, like, the routing is no longer what makes the system suck and expensive and break and fail. It's all just an opportunity. It's either going to work or it's not. You either have the credit line or you don't. And so it's sort of like an extended credit line through many peers. And if you can accomplish most of your transactions this way, you won't need Bitcoin scaling. You won't need, trusted custodians and whatever. Like you could just say, I have enough people in my life that I trust with enough balances to where I can get most of what I get done without settling at all. That's, the hope.
That's wild. That's crazy to think about. I didn't even think about the idea of
Let's
like
kill
channels,
money,
like
guy.
bridging them together. That'd be amazing.
This is
Okay,
maybe a more
well,
scary way to look at it, and we can leave your audience with this nightmare that what if what I'm talking about?
Yes.
What if this idea actually makes sense? What if it actually works? And what if we don't even need Bitcoin?
I would love it. I would love it. I'm here for it. Let's end it there.
It's a bit hippie, woo-woo kind of idea, but I think we probably do need Bitcoin because you can't actually trust everybody. But yeah,
you can't ruin it. You can't spoil it. No, you have to. You
it's
have to
fun to
leave
think
them
about. That's all.
with the hook. Yeah. All right, man. That's a great note to end on. Dude, thank you for joining me. Thank you for answering all the questions. I've been wanting to take some serious time into PubKey that I haven't gotten to yet. So this was wonderful. I'll catch you on the Telegram, and I'll give links and stuff to all that good stuff. Anything else? Anybody you want to point anybody to check out?
No, just if you're a dev, please check out PubKey. We have an org and GitHub that you can look at all the code that we have currently have open source. We're trying to start meeting regularly, and probably this quarter, if not next quarter, we will be actually doing some incentive-based events where we'll have either a hackathon or bounties or things like this around certain themes for building with PubKey. So we this is our first year we have a marketing budget, so we'll be marketing BitKit and PubKey to developers.
Nice.
Like this. So yeah, please, if you're a dev, check it out. If you're not a dev and you're just interested or user, please don't be mad at me for saying nice things about Noster. And please give our app.
That's not going to help. That's not going to help. Everybody's going to hate you.
I'm just trying to be useful and I'm trying to be honest. I think there's a lot of great things about Noster, but I think that we can still do better.
No, I love it. I love arguing about it, man. It's way better if there's disagreements and people actually have opinions or strong tendencies towards one or the other. Like some of my favorite things about people on Nostr is how much they shit on peer-to-peer. And like, I love hole punch stuff too,
I'm just glad all this stuff actually became relevant, because 5 years ago, there wasn't much of caring about any of this. It was kind of like Ion was a thing, and Ion really wanted to make a bunch of specs, but nobody cared. And that kind of stayed that way. But Noster became something. Blue Sky became something. It's like 20 million plus users. So there's a lot of relevance now to what we're doing, and I'm hoping that people will see the differences because we're trying to actually fix problems that Noster has avoided fixing and do something that is sustainable and through a cathedral kind of company strategy. And Blue Sky, which seems to be the current hope or the most successful thing, is very, very bent towards moderation, very, very bent towards censorship, censoring as much as possible. And I think that it's going to be interesting. I think we have a place. I think PubKey will be a counterculture to that. It will be a place for maybe Noster and Bitcoiners to progress to something more mature and complex and more intentional in design. And I think maybe we'll carve out our own niche at the very least.
Sweet. Hell yeah. Well, I'll stay informed. I'll still be doing episodes on it, on updates and stuff. Might even do some videos as I start to get to play around with this. So I'll keep you up to date. I'll tag you and shit.
I'll be in touch soon with that private beta invite.
Yeah. Hell yeah. All right. Dude, thank you again for joining me. And
thank you.
We'll close it out. This is something I want so badly to figure out how to plug all of this crap together, because I feel like we have all of the pieces, like everything that we need. They're just not all in the same place. And PubKey is such a fascinating, like I said in this episode, is that PubKey seems to be perfectly in the middle between Noster and the whole bunch in tackling things that both have in their own corners not yet tackled. And the idea of having an entirely alternative DNS and making it explicitly something that can just be in the browser is so cool. And just a really good choice in a very subtle way, in the sense that it might seem like an arbitrary decision, but it could have very outsized benefits to the trade-offs that these other ideas have to deal with. In Noster being the relay issue and the potential for censorship if things centralize in the ecosystem itself, and then on the hole punch side, the potential problems with being overly complex and then key hierarchies and identity. So I want to tell you how I think about the show notes and the description. You're going to have lots of links down there. I specifically try to collect every link that I can think of and place it in the description so that I can get to it later. Because if I just save it in my notes, it might as well be gone in a lot of cases. It's usually not organized, and it's certainly not in the context of the conversation that I had. So I want you to remember that the description of this show is literally my own personal database for how I find all of the things that I wanted to dig into or that I was saving in relation to the episode or the person that I was having the chat with. So that RSS feed is really my database. And if you are ever looking for something, don't forget that that's where it is. You can just search the Bitcoin Audible feed, and you might just be able to find whatever it is you're looking for. And I'm going to make a much better version and better way to search it and sort through all of the content and the episodes and everything that I do on bitcoinaudible.com. That's just a very slow moving project because the internet sucks, I guess. I don't really have a good answer for that. Maybe it's just WordPress. I don't know. Maybe I'm retarded. But anyway, we'll close this out. A shout out to John Carvalho, to Synonym, to PubKey for the incredible stuff that they're building, for also being a great guy and always having a very strong opinion about everything that he has an opinion about, and for coming on the show to hang out and go through some really cool ideas and tools and stuff happening in the Bitcoin space. Don't forget to check out Fold. We have a referral link down there, which will get you 20,000 sats. Don't forget to check out BitKit, which will have some, as he talked about, we'll actually have some integrations with PubKey in the not too distant future. It not like immediately on the table, but down the road, another reason to check that one out. But also just in general, it's a really fantastic on-chain and Lightning wallet that is non-custodial. And then I also added in my affiliate link for Blockstream to get yourself a Jade Plus. There's a discount down there, which I still haven't gone to confirm, so I don't know what it is. But if you find it in the description, it'll tell you all about it. All right. Thank you guys so much. I will catch you on the next episode. Until then, I'm Guy Swan. Take it easy, guys.